If you're like most of us, you probably don't give a second thought to the generic medications in your cabinet. They're just there, right? Reliable, affordable, doing their job. A 2021 study, for instance, found that, wow, something like 88.6% of older Americans surveyed had at least one prescription in the past year. And get this, 91% of those were for generics. We just trust them. Implicitly, we assume they're safe, effective, always available. But here's the crucial question, maybe the one we don't ask enough. Is that trust really justified? Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into, well, a hidden vulnerability, a really systemic issue within our generic drug supply chain. It challenges basically everything we assume about the quality and safety of the medications we take every single day. And we're going to zero in on a critical failure. The FDA's struggle, frankly, its inability sometimes to consistently assure that these generic drugs are truly therapeutically equivalent to the brand names.
That's exactly right. And when we talk about therapeutic equivalence, we mean that a generic drug should perform identically to its brand name version. Same active ingredients, same strength, same dosage form, and crucially, the same effectiveness and the same safety profile. Our mission in this deep dive is really to uncover how our overwhelming reliance on foreign manufacturing for these essential medicines creates significant risks that are often unseen. We'll look at why the current oversight, well, it frequently falls short. It leaves those assurances of equivalence basically unverified. And then we'll explore what tangible solutions are actually on the table to protect public health and, yes, even our national security.
Okay, get ready because our journey is going to take us through some pretty shocking revelations from former FDA inspectors. We'll look at critical research that directly challenges the common assumptions we all make about drug quality. And we'll take a really stark look at how our medicine cabinet has kind of quietly become a geopolitical flashpoint. Okay, let's unpack this. We rely on these medications for, everything from headaches to serious chronic conditions. But have you ever really stopped to consider where they actually come from? You might picture, I don't know, a clean, modern domestic plant operating under the strictest regulations. The reality, though, it's a vast, interconnected global web.
Yeah, what becomes immediately clear when you just look at the numbers is the sheer scale of our dependence. It's staggering. The U.S. relies on overseas manufacture for about 75% of its essential drug supply. 75%. But it's not just the finished pills we swallow. It's the foundational building blocks, what we call active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs. China, for example, is the world's largest producer of APIs. And India, which supplies about half of our generic drugs, well, India relies on China for approximately 80% of their APIs. It's this really intricate, sometimes precarious, interlocking dependency.
Right. So to put that into perspective, there was a study from Washington University in St. Louis. It found that an astounding 83% of the top 100 generic drugs that Americans take have no U.S.-based source for these active ingredients. None. So it's not just about the final pill. It's about a profound lack of domestic foundational components for most of our common meds. And this makes that whole question of therapeutic equivalence even trickier, doesn't it? When the very building blocks come from so far away under different systems.
Exactly. And this situation brings us straight to a fundamental challenge. What happens when quality gets compromised? Because in a global market that prioritizes low cost above almost everything else, corners, unfortunately, get cut. You see, the original design of the generic drug marketplace, while it did succeed in lowering healthcare costs, it kind of rested on a slightly unrealistic assumption. The assumption was, if the original brand name drug was proven safe and high quality, then its generic counterparts, once approved, would automatically maintain that same standard. So it implied you'd need minimal ongoing quality verification.
Basically, we assumed quality was just a given, like check the box, it's equivalent, move on. But quality isn't free, is it? And defects nearly always originate from how things are made, from the manufacturing practices.
Precisely. And when quality is merely assumed, instead of being rigorously verified, and when there's very little transparency about where and how it's made, well, the rational economic choice for manufacturers competing solely on price is just to focus on reducing cost. That's the game. And this inevitably, almost mathematically, leads to a decline in quality. It directly undermines the very concept of therapeutic equivalence for generics produced under those pressures.
And we've seen the results, tragic, often fatal consequences. I think back to the contaminated heparin from China in 2007, 2008. That incident killed nearly 100 people. People like Bonnie and Randy Hubley, who died just weeks apart from a drug they needed for dialysis. It's heartbreaking. Or much more recently, in 2023, contaminated eye drops from India killed 4 people and caused serious problems, blindness even, in at least 55 patients. These aren't just isolated events or minor side effects. They show that a failure in quality control, a failure to ensure that equivalence can literally kill people.
And looking at the bigger picture, there was a recent study that starkly highlighted this. It found that serious adverse events, things like hospitalization, even death, were 54% more likely for foreign generic drugs compared to American-made ones, 54%. This isn't just theory. It's measurable data showing a direct impact on patient safety. We're talking about things like cardiac arrests, gastrointestinal hemorrhage, delirium linked to these quality differences. This data really points to a systemic failure in assuring that these foreign-produced generic drugs are, in practice, therapeutically equivalent to the brand names in safety and quality. The system is designed to assure that, but it seems like it's often not working as intended.
Okay, so with stakes this high and risks that are clearly measurable, you'd logically expect really rigorous oversight, right? Especially for the foreign facilities supplying the bulk of our medications. Yet what we've discovered through our research, it exposes this profound, honestly critical gap in the FDA system. A gap specifically in assuring drug quality and therefore therapeutic equivalence.
That's exactly the problem. There's a former FDA inspector who spent a lot of time inspecting plants in India and China. He recounted what he just bluntly called the dog and pony show. That's his term. Unlike in the U.S., where inspections are typically unannounced, they just show up overseas, inspections are often pre-announced, sometimes weeks or even months in advance. And that advance notice, it obviously completely undermines the effectiveness of any real oversight, doesn't it?
Weeks or months. Can you just imagine that? Inspectors arrive and what do they find? The smell of fresh paint, maybe,
Yeah.
perfectly manicured landscaping, and any potentially problematic operations conveniently shut down or moved elsewhere for the day. Some employees might even be sent home, told not to come in. And the critical processes that are running are choreographed as if performing on a stage, he said. Just presenting this immaculate illusion designed purely to pass the inspection. It's an act.
It is an act, and he described it as terrifying. This inspector and his team, they often had to go to really extraordinary lengths. Things like digging through garbage dumpsters for discarded records, reviewing hidden computer logs, sometimes even booking their own travel secretly. Why? Just to conduct truly unannounced visits, to avoid being tipped off by leaks within the system or the companies themselves. And what they found when they did that, he called it terrifying. Fake laboratories pumping out hundreds of test results daily for products that were never actually tested. Failing results just ignored, deleted, replaced by fabricated passing values. And even, get this, filthy registered shadow facilities, secretly making drugs and funneling them through the clean show facilities for shipment. It just lays bare this profound failure in the FDA's ability to truly verify quality overseas. And by extension, it's a failure to assure therapeutic equivalence in those markets.
So, this means substandard, maybe even fake medicines could be getting shipped to the US by the tens of thousands every day, directly contributing to those adverse events we talked about, and maybe even deaths that aren't always traced back. That former inspector, he even admitted that personally, if he had a choice, he would never consume a drug product made in what he called an unregulated market. Which just begs the question for all of us,
Yeah.
right? What are we supposed to do when we often don't have that choice or even the information to make one? Our system is supposed to provide that assurance of quality, that guarantee of therapeutic equivalence, but it seems like it's failing on a pretty massive scale in some areas.
And that failure is systemic. It flows directly from that unrealistic assumption we discussed earlier. The marketplace, yes, it drove down costs, but it essentially operated on this flawed premise. If the original drug was okay, the generics would be too, needing minimal ongoing checks. This flawed assumption, you combine that with insufficient, easily gameable oversight, and a market relentlessly pushing for the absolute lowest price. It means quality isn't just unverified, it's frequently undermined. Manufacturers simply have little incentive to invest in robust quality systems when it's not transparently measured or rewarded by the market. And that leads directly to the grave therapeutic equivalence issues we're now seeing evidence of.
Wow. Okay, this situation clearly extends far beyond just individual patient health, as critical as that is. What are the broader implications here? What about, say, our national security?
Well, this is where it really hits home, I think, for a lot of people. Our extreme over-reliance on foreign generic drugs,
Right.
particularly from potential adversaries or competitors like China, and also heavily from India. It presents what many security experts are now calling an existential threat to the country. That's strong language, but it's used deliberately. Think about it. If China or India decided, for political reasons, trade disputes, or even during a conflict, to shut down the supply of prescription drugs to the United States, they could potentially do so at any moment. And currently, the U.S. simply does not have a comprehensive backup plan for that scenario.
Let that sink in for a second. Millions of Americans suddenly without access to life-saving drugs. It's almost unthinkable. And we've seen China impose export restrictions before, right? On things like rare earth elements. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, India blocked the export of certain critical ingredients, partly because their own supply chains from China were disrupted. So this isn't just some abstract theoretical scenario. It's a demonstrated capability they possess.
Absolutely. And to connect this to the bigger picture, look at the U.S. Department of Defense. They classify more than 54% of their own pharmaceutical supply chain as high or very high risk, specifically because of this reliance on foreign suppliers. Even more alarming, Chinese state media has openly, publicly suggested that drug exports could be withheld as a strategic weapon in a conflict scenario. I mean, no adversary needs to fire a single shot if they can simply choke off our access to essential antibiotics or insulin or even basic pain medication for the population.
And it's not hypothetical. We saw a real-world example just recently in 2023. The chemotherapy drug cisplatin, a vital cancer treatment, went into a major shortage. Why? Because the FDA restricted imports from a major foreign manufacturer due to quality concerns. Okay, good, they caught it. But there was no readily available FDA-approved alternative made elsewhere. It forced the agency, ironically, to turn to a then unapproved Chinese company just to fill that critical gap. It vividly highlights how fragile a supply chain is and how reactive, not proactive, our current approach often is to ensuring both supply stability and quality.
Consider these numbers. About 90% of the world's antibiotics originate in some way from China. 90% for specific common drugs. 95% of ibuprofen ingredients. 91% of hydrocortisone ingredients are imported from China. Our own experts estimate that somewhere between 20 to 40% of all generic drugs use key starting materials, those basic chemical building blocks that come from China. When a single country holds that kind of stranglehold, as some put it, on these critical ingredients, it's not merely a supply chain issue. It's a profound national security risk that jeopardizes the health and stability of the entire nation.
So, okay, the big question. If the tap were turned off tomorrow, how long would our medicine supplies actually last?
Experts paint a pretty grim picture. They say our current stockpile, our buffer in the U.S., is measured in months, not years.
Months. Okay. But here's the truly sobering part, the kicker.
Right. If people knew a cutoff was coming, or even just widely suspected it was imminent, human nature takes over. Hoarding behavior begins, as one expert put it, and the shortage will become a matter of days.
Days. Imagine the societal chaos, the public health crisis, the sheer panic of an immediate, widespread unavailability of essential medications. It's a truly chilling prospect. Okay, this paints a dark, deeply unsettling picture. But there have to be solutions, right? There are pathways forward. So what steps can we actually take to create a safer, more reliable medicine supply? And critically, to truly assure therapeutic equivalence?
A critical first step, absolutely critical, involves transparency. Real transparency. We need fundamental changes to drug labeling. So patients and their doctors and pharmacists can clearly see not just where the medications were manufactured, but just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, what their quality rating is. Is it top tier? Is it acceptable? Does it have known issues? There was one study that found consumers overwhelmingly prefer U.S. or Canada-made drugs. That's true. But interestingly, if both quality and location are transparent, they will consistently choose the high-quality drugs, regardless of origin. This kind of transparency would empower the market itself to reward quality, finally, and it would help overcome the current opaque system where that true therapeutic equivalence is often obscured or just assumed.
It's about giving you, the patient, a real choice, isn't it? Imagine being able to pharmacy hop, maybe, looking for a specific manufacturer known for quality, like that former FDA inspector did for his 91-year-old grandmother. He talked about sometimes having to settle for products from companies with known quality issues simply because there was no alternative available or no transparent information about other options. As consumers, we currently lack this fundamental information, and that feels like a significant failing in ensuring patient confidence in the therapeutic equivalence of their meds.
And this brings up another interesting possibility, right? Could pharmacists play a much more active role in this new transparent landscape? They're right there on the front lines. They have relationships with patients. They could be empowered with the right data to guide choices, explain quality ratings, and act as a crucial bridge in closing this information gap.
Okay, transparency is key. What else? Another absolutely vital solution has to be strengthening FDA enforcement and resources, right? We probably need harsher penalties for companies caught engaging in fraudulent or illegal practices, things that actually deter this behavior. And we definitely need significantly increased investment in unannounced foreign inspections. Let's stop the dog and pony shows.
Yeah.
The data is clear. Unannounced inspections have a 4 times greater chance of identifying a problem. 4 times. This would directly address the systemic failure of the current inspection system in actually verifying quality and ensuring that therapeutic equivalence isn't just on paper.
Exactly. And to connect this to the bigger picture, we also need market-based solutions that actually incentivize quality, not just the race to the bottom on price. The USP, that's the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, a respected scientific nonprofit, they've proposed something called a resiliency benchmark. This would essentially rate manufacturers based on their investment in quality systems and diverse, secure supply chains. Then governments, which are huge purchasers of drugs from Medicare, the Department of Defense, the VA, they can prioritize buying drugs from manufacturers who meet these higher benchmarks. Even paying a slightly higher price for essential, currently super low-cost generics, maybe 13 cents a pill instead of 10 cents, could make a massive difference. It could encourage sustainable production, maybe even some domestic investment by making quality financially viable again for manufacturers.
Makes sense. And finally, we surely need innovation and much better supply chain mapping. Things like advanced manufacturing techniques, maybe new biology based methods, could help produce some of these key starting materials right here in the US. That would significantly reduce our dangerous reliance on foreign sources for the basics. And beyond that, imagine using tools like AI to map these complex supply chains, tracing them right down to their raw material origins. This would allow us to proactively identify vulnerabilities, bottlenecks, maybe even find alternative suppliers before a crisis hits, which seems far more effective than the reactive, scrambling approach we often see now when a shortage occurs.
Yeah, and this naturally leads us to ask, okay, if these solutions exist, why aren't we doing more of this already? Seems logical. Well, part of the challenge, particularly for reshoring manufacturing back to the U.S., involves navigating complex permitting delays, environmental regulations, especially for some of the older, dirtier chemical processes. That's real. However, these are not insurmountable obstacles. They require political will and smart policy. And importantly, by harnessing advancements in AI, automation, maybe continuous manufacturing, we could significantly offset traditional labor costs. That could make U.S. production much more competitive again, even for generics, and less reliant on those foreign, potentially lower quality sources. It really is a matter of strategic investment and prioritizing resilience over just lowest cost.
So, what does all of this mean for you and your family listening right now? The insights from today's deep dive reveal, I think, a critical, really unsettling vulnerability in something as fundamental as our daily medications. We've talked about everything from contaminated drugs and the systemic failure of oversight
Hmm.
to severe national security threats stemming from this dependency. And we've explored some powerful potential solutions. But the fundamental issue we keep coming back to is the current system's apparent inability to reliably assure that the generic drugs we all rely on are truly therapeutically equivalent in terms of quality and safety.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you to consider next time you look in your medicine cabinet. If you knew precisely where every single ingredient in your medication came from and how rigorously it was tested to ensure its quality, its potency, its therapeutic equivalence,
Mhm.
would it change your perspective? Would it change your choices if you had them?
The future of our medicine cabinet, and frankly our national security, profoundly depends on addressing these issues head on. We can't ignore them. The current system of generic drug assurance has undeniable critical gaps that demand urgent attention and meaningful reform. It seems clear. What will you do the next time you pick up a prescription? Will you ask the pharmacist where it was made? Will you talk to your doctor? The choice and perhaps the demand for change ultimately rest with you.